I hadn't even thought of that. See, you're educating me right now. Hello, and welcome to House of Bards. This is maybe slightly awkward. My name is Alex, and you might be expecting to hear my co-host Beth, but unfortunately, Beth's computer troubles that we have bemoaned constantly over the last few episodes have not improved. And though attempts were made, for the moment, it rather seems that Beth is not really able to record new episodes, which sucks.
I will remember you. Will you remember me?
Anyway, the reason why I'm still doing an episode is because, although I did not go this year, it was QCon, I want to say 24 this weekend, and I said I didn't go, and it's true, I did not. But my buddy Maxi, who you may remember from the episode on QCon last year, or from the game of Bards, or from Beth and I constantly talking about her because she is in our Monday game group, or if you happen to be a fan of the Magic the Gathering audio drama, as the voices of Oketra, Vraska, and Drana. So please welcome Maxi.
Hey!
She's back again, here to tell us all about what she got up to at QCon 24. It is 24, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's 24.
Because like the first one of these I did, which was 2 years ago, was the QCon 22 experiment, so I'm pretty sure it was QCon 24 this year.
Yeah, it is. It's 24.
QCon happened this...
Just full QCon.
I say this weekend. I mean, obviously, depending on how long we talk, this may take ages to actually upload. So today is the 21st of June 2017, and QCon ran from...
16th to the 18th.
16th to the 18th, thank you. So, yeah, as I said, I've been in England, so I've not been able to go this year, which sucks, because I'm sure I would have done a cool idea. But Maxi came to me slightly before the whole QCon thing went off, and told me that she was gonna try and do, like, a similar kind of experiment to the things that I usually do at QCon.
Yes.
So maybe you want to tell us about that.
Okay, so, you could recall, Alex, like, 2 years ago, the last QCon that I ran something,
Was that 2 years ago? It was last year, I thought,
yeah.
Because you were telling us about it last year.
So last year I came to you and I had, like, a bunch of different option scenarios to run, and I asked you about, like, which ones were most feasible, and then I ended up, on your advice, doing the Little Shop of Sparks.
Right. And at the time, I, made a choice not only based on what sounded cool, but also, what sounded the most different from what I was doing, because obviously Maxi is cool as a GM and has a lot of different ideas, and I wanted us to be competing as little as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't there this year, so I presume you picked one of the other ideas that you had back then?
I did. I picked the one idea that you said to me sounded really cool and didn't sound anything like your games, but was the one that you suggested sounded like too much work.
Yeah.
And it was the Bard's Tale, essentially.
Right.
And I sat down and I thought about this, and I thought to myself, I really, really want to run, an old Bard campaign, and I really do want them to excavate a historical site, but it might... Alex is right, it's going to be way too much hard work for me, and I don't think I could, plan this event to happen for them to all uncover. So that's where I decided to run 2 scenarios this year, where the first scenario would be the event itself, with a group of 6 player characters who interact with and attempt to avert this disastrous historical event. And I would be taking notes, and I would be keeping an eye on what they were doing and stuff that would be important for the later games, so that virtually my thinking was that the second scenario 300 years later, when a bunch of nerdy bards show up and decide to find out what went on there, the scenario would virtually have written itself. I would just, like, lift the notes that I'd taken already, the stuff that hadn't been interacted with, and kind of just, like, see where that went on.
Right, okay, so, like, there's one group setting up what's happening, and then the second group is these bards who are going to come in and do archaeology on it to try and figure out what was happening, right?
Yes.
Right, that actually sounds quite similar, and I imagine that listeners who have heard last year's QCon episode would remember, sounds very similar to what I did with the Magnian Vault series. And it's a good idea. Like, it was a really cool space to, like, explore when I ran it, and it sounds like it was probably really cool for you to do.
Oh yeah, no, it was absolutely great. And I got tons of data, and the group that I got was fantastic. And they were really enthusiastic, and the it took a really surprising turn for me personally, because it ended up with this group of bards, two of which were full bards, one a College of Valor and one a College of Law. Everyone else was a multi-class bard, and they set it up like the two full bards were their teachers, their professors, and the rest of them were just, like, doing extra credit work.
That kind of works, I think, if you're going to do, like, an all-one-class party. Like, I remember when I did the thing that I talked about in the first QCon episode, the Garden Party series, like, when it came to having the Thieves Guild group where everybody was a rogue, I think there was, like, a rogue in there who was an assassin, and a rogue in there who was a burglar, and one that was an arcane trickster, but then there was also, like, a multi-classed rogue fighter and a multi-class rogue cleric. Because it's like, it depends how, like, specific you want to make your like one class scenario as to whether or not it's viable to have everybody be actually the same class, like, entirely.
Yeah.
So I think it's probably, like, even though bards technically can take healing spells in 5th edition, it was probably a good idea for you to have, like, multi-class bards. Was that, like, did you have, like, pre-gens, or did you, like, let the players come up with that?
Thankfully, this time, as opposed to last time, I had all the character sheets done and dusted.
Alright, cool.
Everything was written out, I was so much more well prepared, so you can't call me out on this one.
That's cool. I remember last time you only had, like, exactly as many character sheets as you needed. Did you have...
Yeah, I had more.
Like, I don't want to like call you up on, like, not doing what I consider best practice, but I remember saying, like, last year that the thing that I like to do is have a maximum capacity for my sessions of 6, but then have 8 character sheets, because it just means that, like, the last person to come to the table doesn't have to be like, oh, okay, I guess I'm gonna, like, be this thing then.
Well,
it's like they still have, like, 3 choices.
Well, I listened to you, and I made 7 character sheets for both campaigns.
Alright, that's cool. I mean, it's like, again, it's like, I don't want to be like, oh, everybody should do it exactly the same way that I've done it, but I have my reasons why I think it's a good idea. And the thing about QCon and conventions like it is that we want people to have fun, right?
Mm-hmm.
We especially want them to have fun if they've never, like, done anything like that before. And I feel like, given that you're doing things like having pre-gens so that they don't have to go through character creation, which is time-consuming and, if you've never played the game before, confusing, I feel like having a choice of characters to play, who are often drastically different, is, like, a really easy bit of agency that you can, like, give a new player. So I suppose it's more that I have my reasons that I have explained why I think it's a good idea. And so it's cool to hear that you did. Did you have, like, a maximum of 5 or 6 players?
I had a maximum of 6 players.
Alright, cool. There's still a choice of 2, though, right?
Yeah, I had a character sheet on float that, after the choice was made, if anyone died, they can just, like, pick up this already pre-done character.
Also a good reason to have more character sheets than you need. I hadn't even thought of that, see? You're educating me right now.
Okay, cool. So, what I came up with for the first scenario, which we're probably only going to, like, pick on as the second scenario develops when I say, like, what actually happened, was that, I created, I wanted an enclosed space, essentially, and I was going to put like a bunch of stuff in a bunch of rooms. So I made a citadel called the Lyesmith Citadel, which was located on the borders of the new nation of Perugit, which is like the first Orcish nation in my world, which will eventually become the Perugian Empire.
Right, so we're pretty far back in time at this point.
Yes.
So you're seeing the genesis of this new world power, but right at the moment it's just a little tiny baby. Yeah,
pretty much. So the founder of the nation of Perugit, Prophet Dinas Javanta, has recently passed away, and her youngest son Radim has ascended the throne. His older brother got passed over, essentially, which arouses a lot of suspicion, but in the original scenario, it stated that he chose to pass over the throne. And Radim he's a young, cautious ruler. He wants to live up to his mother's legend, and he wants to maintain this new Orcish nation that she's created. And one of his first calls to action is to plan a meeting with various other leaders from neighboring clans and neighboring kingdoms, and talk about their continued alliances going forward from now on, essentially. And he decided to host this political summit, this gathering in the Lyesmith Citadel on the borders of his lands. And the first group of players were all rulers from various lands. And because the Perugian Empire is a heavy basis on basically like Persian and Turkish sort of historical elements, I said to them that, like, regardless of what your actual titles are, you can come up with whatever your titles are, you will be referred to as Pasha. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Or Pasha, which is like a Turkish word for like military or ruler, essentially.
Okay.
So, like, because they're obviously not going to call these people, like, Jan Dinas as well, because that would be weird. Like, they're not going to acknowledge that these other people are, like, a king or a queen or something like that. They just call them Pasha.
Right. Which is, I guess, like an honorific for, like, a head of state.
Yeah, essentially.
Sorts, right.
Essentially.
Okay.
And, well, when I printed out the maps for the Citadel, I saw that there were, like, 6 floors of it. And I was like, there is absolutely no way they are traipsing through 6 floors of this. Like, I'm not doing that.
Okay, that implies... So, sorry, like that implies to me, though, that the maps were not of your doing. So, do you want to, like... Did you get them from somewhere? Is there a resource we can plug?
Don't jump in.
Oh, okay, right. Okay, so you generated them then?
Yeah, I generated them. And
I mean, yeah, we can do that again, sure. Hey, Donjon.bin, which does not sponsor us, but for all we mention it on the podcast, I mean, the guy probably could, is a really, really great resource for pretty much anybody who might listen to our podcast. Like, if you want to, like, GM Dungeons and Dragons, or if you're just, like, writing high fantasy or something like that, there are a whole load of tools. The one that Maxi's referring to is presumably the Dungeon Creator, which randomly generates maps for dungeons and other, like, crawlable locations in a world. And there are some stuff you can put in, like you can decide whether you want there to be only one staircase or like lots of different exits and egresses, and how many floors you want, how big you want it to be, how the rooms connect up and how closely together they're put together. So like you could have very close together rooms for like being a castle or some other building, or very far away ones if you want it to be like a sort of cave like subterranean complex. And yeah, also you can put in a seed, I guess, for like random generation. So it's I don't really use it as much as I should, because I sometimes find it difficult to like fit my vision as to what an environment should be like into what it spits out. But if you just want a dungeon that you can run people through, and the dungeon is not really the important bit, but you got to have something, that's a really good resource to have.
Mm-hmm.
Which I presume is why you used it, right, Maxi?
Yeah, pretty much. So I thought that well, I'm probably going to have the actual meeting on a mid-floor of this this citadel. So to give the first party, the option of going up or down to make their escape when the terrible event like begins to happen, essentially around them.
Ooh.
And whatever they chose, I would like ensure that for the next scenario, that would have like an effect essentially. And the party chose to ascend the tower. So immediately my decision was, right, the 3 floors, the ground, second, third floor, they're gone. They sink into the earth. They like crumble away essentially.
Oh, okay. That's a cool idea, actually. Although you've intrigued me now when you started talking about like this when the event starts happening, because I'm immediately thinking of like was this a red wedding kind of deal?
Yeah, a little bit. A little bit.
Like yeah, I'm excited now. So all right. So you got this group of rulers together in a group, like meeting the new king, I want to say.
Yeah, the like sultan at this point.
And then what happens?
And well, I'll just like quickly go through the names of them, if that's okay.
All right, cool.
Okay,
cool.
so we had and I'm just gonna call them Pasha as well.
Sure.
Like anyone who is actually like Turkish, please correct me on my pronunciation of that. Or I don't know if it's Pasha or Pasha, but I'm just gonna roll with what I can. So there was Pasha Trast, who was played by Connor, and he was a half-orc paladin. Pasha Chala, who was a dragonborn sorcerer, a silver dragonborn, played by John Paul.
Wait, Chala?
Yeah.
As in like King of Wakanda Chala?
No, it's spelled completely different, and she was female as well.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
Then there was Pasha Avi, who was a tiefling rogue, played by Jonathan.
That's an unusual choice for a head of state, a rogue.
Indeed it was. I figured that, like, and this is what Jonathan came up to me with, that, she was kind of, like, formally part of, like, this mafia sort of deal.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, well, it's fair, like, there are places in the world that will, like, facilitate this, essentially.
That, I don't know if you use this for the pre-gen, but that's, like, seems to me like the kind of scenario that you might find the Rogue Mastermind class from the Sword Coast Adventurers Guide very useful.
Yeah. I was like, I didn't have my Sword Coasts on me when I was, like, writing them all up.
Fair enough.
Then there's, Pasha Olaf, who was a high elf.
Cool.
And like I liked that one a lot because like my elves tend to have like a sort of Germanic and Slavic lean to them.
Nice.
And then there was Pasha Zenon, who was a half elf bard played by Rachel. And
you can never go wrong with a half elf bard.
No. And
they're just so good.
What was good about like that was that Zenon decided to be Olaf's son, essentially.
Oh, okay. That's cool.
And then finally there was Pasha Rand, who was a human barbarian, which like I honestly thought was like kind of a war chief sort of vibe.
It does sound like it, definitely. And who played them?
Stephen.
Cool.
And basically, they all gather in this meeting room, and there's a scribe there that takes down their names, which is very important for when the bards show up. And Yandinus Radim begins this great speech and talks about like furthering their alliances with each other. And just as like he begins to start business, essentially, everything goes wrong. The lamps darken, the tower begins to tremble, and he sends out 2 guards to investigate what's going on. And then the Pashas and the Andinus and his brother and all those who are assembled there as well are sealed within this meeting room, as the sandstone of the doors begin to like tendril across each other and, like, trap them in what was supposed to be their final tomb, essentially. And they can hear the screams of the bodyguards outside as blood begins to pour under the doorframe, essentially. And then they break themselves out. They choose which way to break themselves out and begin an ascent up to the top floor to freedom.
I mean, I don't know that that's the choice I would have made. But, okay, sure. They evidently had some sort of plan. Like, you said there were, like, 6 floors?
Yeah, but I told you that they were on the mid-floor.
Yeah, but, like, you go up to the top, that's a long jump to freedom.
Oh, that was because there are griffins on the top, on, like, sort of this, if you think about, like, a lighthouse, and instead of a light, it's a small, shed.
Right, and I want to say, like, an aviary?
Yeah, and there are, like, just griffins there.
Right, and presumably they knew about this? Like, they'd seen them coming in or something?
Well, they had the Yandinus with them who told them that, like, they kept griffins on the top floor, but they could travel by, like, ground, essentially, because they don't know if the griffins might be dead already. There was, like, that was the gamble that they had to, like, roll with.
Okay.
And, I'm going to skip forward 300 years into the future for the actual, Bard game. And they arrive at the Lyesmith Citadel. They've, I've got actually an intro here of, what I read out to them, if you're cool for me to read this out. It is the year 356 of the Pharmarian Age, and we are 24 years into the reign of Gisu, Yandinus of the Perugian Empire and the youngest Orc monarch ever to rule, having ascended the throne at the tender age of 12. Yandinus Gisu is known to be an avid fan of art, song, and theatre, often making generous donations to the local Bards colleges and encouraging a popular interest in the arts. These colleges are indeed grateful for her patronage, and one in particular has quite the surprise for her. You're all members of the Perugian Bardic Academy, and you've been given an important task. Yandinus Gisu's birthday is coming up, and as a surprise, your college has decided to write an epic of an historical and undocumented event to perform for her pleasure at her party. And as luck would have it, the Academy has recently been granted permission to excavate the site of the Lyesmith Citadel, a place that had been previously restricted to travel to given its possible dangers to the region, but these dangers may have been great importance worthy of commemorating into song, so it's worth the risk. All you know is that the Lyesmith Citadel had previously been the site of an important meeting 300 years ago, headed by Yandinus Radim, the first Orcish king, who was almost assassinated during this meeting. It is up to you, Bards, to discover what truly happened at the Citadel, and remember, your retelling of this story is what history will remember. So, what basically happened was that, what happened at the Citadel was kind of covered up. No one really wants to know the details behind the possible assassination attempt of the first Orcish king in a nation that is still in its infancy. That is bad press, essentially. And what happened there was, like, brushed over. And so...
Can I say?
Yeah?
I love this gimmick for an all-bard game. Like, I really do. I love this idea that, like, you're gonna you're gonna make like an epic, a saga, if you like, to perform at the end, based on what you discover. Like that sounds like exactly the kind of thing that I would have come up with for this kind of game. Just because it's interesting. It's like you have a reason to go and do the thing other than, like, kill dudes, get loot, right?
Yeah.
And it means that you have, like, a lot more pliable an adventure without having to, like, constantly think about what there is in there, and like, that's, again, despite the fact that there's the entire point of getting you on the show because of what you told me before. I feel bad about comparing this to the stuff that I've done previously, but it's the exact kind of thinking that I tried to go into each of the experiments with, is this idea of what justification can we have for doing something different. Like, it was exactly why I wanted to do the Magnian Vault, where you'd have the dungeon be designed by the first group, because that's cool. You've never done that before. You know, that's a weird thing to do. And like having this idea of oh, hey, the bards are going to go and they're going to do a dungeon crawl, but they're also going to like come up with a like story about what happened here.
Mm.
Did they like get to perform it at the end?
They didn't. We ran out of time, but they did get to like go through everything, and they were such, oh my god, these players were amazing. They took notes, they were so enthusiastic, they got into the character roles as well, to the point where it basically looked like Professor Snape leading the Breakfast Club.
That's what I love about QCon as well, is you have this whole like group of people and you can just say, hey, we're gonna do this weird thing, and if they're down for like actually participating in your game in the first place, they're just like, yeah, okay, that sounds cool, and they get into it. Like, I remember, I think I said this on the House of Bards about it, like last year I was really, really worried that like the group who would like the first group, the one who would actually design the dungeon, would like get it intellectually but find it too weird to really engage properly with the idea. And I remember being surprised that like they were not only like genuinely invested in the construction of this dungeon, but they even went so far as to have architectural opinions in character about what should or shouldn't be included. Like, I remember I gave them the thing where it's like, here are 7 things or whatever, and you have to have 5 of them. And I remember the barbarian making the argument for one of the ones that they exclude being the library, because he's just like, I don't need no book learning. That's not a thing that we should have in our dungeon. I'm like, that's cool. It's cool, and I don't know if it's like, I don't know what it is exactly about QCon. I feel like it's because, like, there's a lot of people who've never played the game before, so if they don't know what to expect, they just sort of, like, roll with whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I feel like the like, tabletop role-playing at the con sort of has this microcosm of a reputation about being a place where you can try out weird shit like this.
Yeah.
So, I just really love it when your players get into your weird idea and just be like, okay, this is cool, and we're gonna take it as seriously as we're taking the rest of the game. So it's really great to hear that they actually like took notes for, because presumably the idea is that because it's entertainment, right?
Yeah.
They're coming up with, you've got this additional wrinkle of what they eventually come up with doesn't necessarily have to be true.
Yes.
It just has to like be a cohesive story that is entertaining.
That was what I was most excited about, like, possibly happening, to see what they would come up with and how far from the truth it was going to be. That was the point of this experiment. How divergent of the actual event could they make this, and like how exciting it could be. And I was like, 100% success for this. It was amazing. And
you got like 2 levels on that as well, don't you? Because you have like the Chinese whispers type, I think Americans might know it as telephone. The game where you're like passing information down a line by whispering, and it gets garbled just because of like the lossy like communication.
Mm-hmm.
You which I presume was like the point of the game. But you also have this fact that these people are role playing as bards and entertainers, and you've always got this possibility that they find a fact that is of archaeological significance, but like sort of screws up the story a bit, and they just decide to take artistic license and change it. Yes. Yeah, this is a really cool idea.
Thanks.
Like, I'm super into it. So, all right.
So I'll just like quickly go over the
I'm guessing also like the reason you're skipping forward to like the second game is because you want to do like a side-by-side thing about like what the first group did and then what got interpreted by the second group.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted.
That's a cool way of doing it. All right, go on.
Okay, so for the second group, we had Seamus, who played Professor Crump, and he was a half-orc bard of lore. Then we had Ashlyn, who played Torva, who was a half-elf ranger bard. Okay. And I loved Torva because she kind of went with the whole I'm a straight A student aesthetic, and I suck up to the teachers as much as possible.
Yes. I love this. It's so it's weird, right? Because like normally when you put together like a group of randoms for a game, even at conventions, you got this idea of they're all civil to each other, but because they don't know each other, they don't like really. I mean, occasionally, what would happen with my games is that somebody who knew me or knew of me, like you or like my acquaintance, I guess, Kiva, would come and then like fill up the majority of the game with friends that they'd invited. So you'd get that. But like sometimes you would just get a group of people who had never met each other but really like clicked together in their different roles and were entirely comfortable like role playing at a higher level where you have stuff like this. You have like party member interactions that make sense based on the relationship that those party members canonically have in their backstory. And a lot of the time, normally, like outside the context of like a convention or whatever, when you put together a campaign or a one shot in particular with randoms in it, so like at a QUB Dragon Slayers, the organization, the society that does QCOM, also does these 24-hour weekend things.
Yeah.
Where you can stay at the place for 24 hours. Generally speaking, nobody does that because you get tired and also smell. But it's an opportunity basically to have like an unbounded amount of time for a one-shot because nobody's going to actually take 24 hours to do a one-shot. That's ridiculous. And we've had a lot of fun with that sort of stretching of time. But often when you get randoms for that, a lot of them will be nervous, I think, because it's a club space, right? So it's like, oh, all of these people will know a lot more than me and I don't want to screw up. And they tend to be like they get into it, but they're timid. And that doesn't really happen at QCon. Instead, you've got like this group of people who all get in and none of them really know each other, but they like all get that this is not usual. This is a weird thing. So they're just going to go with it. And so you get people figuring each other out and figuring out like, okay, regardless of what we might otherwise think of each other, we can do this character interaction thing. And it's great. I love it.
And so then we had Dave, who was a human fighter bard. Morduai. Dave was played by Mark. Morduai, who was a tiefling cleric bard, played by Edward. Professor Bart, who was a mountain dwarf bard of valor, played by Steve. And Ella, who was a forest gnome rogue bard, played by Triana. And props to Ella as well, because Ella and Torva played off each other incredibly well, and I think it was because Ella was a rogue bard that they decided to sort of go into the natural role of like hey, I'm only here for extra credit sort of thing, and I'm gonna pick on the most studious one of us all who's trying to suck up to the teachers and just be like,
right. So not quite like a bully or a class clown, but definitely somebody who's like, I just want to mark at the end of this, and I'm gonna like grate against anybody who's actually taking it seriously.
Yeah.
This is what I'm talking about. It's fantastic.
So that's my lineup. And
I apologize, by the way, for like fanboying so much over this, but like for context, for those of you who've like never really done a role playing game campaign or whatever with a group of people who initially are randoms, obviously you get the idea that occasionally you get to know the people you play with frequently. This is the kind of thing that generally speaking takes weeks, maybe months to get going. Like this idea of people being comfortable enough with each other's characters and their assessments of them to start developing like inter-character relationships and enmities and whatnot. So it is really cool to hear that like, even though these characters, I guess, are cartoons effectively, they're like larger than life in some respects.
Yeah.
That it's already, these are our defined roles, and I understand from pop culture how this role is supposed to go, enough that I know what kind of relationship I'm supposed to have with each of these people, and I'm prepared to like roleplay it.
Yeah.
Like that's really cool.
It really is, actually. So,
okay.
The bards, like, I told them that, okay, we're just gonna get straight into it, but, like, for background, you stayed in the town of Lyesmith, which is about, 5 to 10 miles away, because it's like New Lyesmith, essentially. It was built in the shadow of the Citadel. No one really goes to the Citadel at all, and so they hike up there, and they get to the outside of this abandoned citadel, and like already I've like scratched off 3 of the floors of the citadel, which have just like sunken or been destroyed essentially. And I was asked about that like straight away, like have they actually like sunken into the ground, or have they like just they debris now? And I was like, have like basically you can investigate that, and like indeed it had sunken into the ground.
Okay. See, I always wonder, like, because it's a higher education establishment context, I always wonder when somebody asks something like that, is like, oh, is one of these people like an geology type person who like knows what the differences between those two effects on an old building should be?
Yeah, I sometimes wonder that as well.
I get really nervous about like giving them an answer, because it's like I know that they're gonna like pull me up on a technicality about one of the two, but I don't know like which it is.
So they get to go into the 3rd floor as like the new ground floor essentially, and I was like, you don't need to make me an investigation check. You just walk around the building, and you can see that there are about 3 points of entry where you can all enter comfortably. Now it's up to you which one you want to try. So Ella decided that she wanted to go through this old broken window. It's like, fair enough. She goes in, she finds a room full of statues, and they're all just like broken and in various sort of disrepair. And originally in the first game, but the first group never interacted with them, they were alive. Those statues had been. And that was going to be combat for them, but they decided to like bypass that room essentially.
Okay.
And Ella checks out the room and finds 2 doors and tries the one on her right. Goes in and it's not locked or anything. Finds a room full of plant life essentially. Marshy plant life. There's moss and fungus everywhere, and like immediately is making nature checks to see if like these are spores and like if they're poisonous in any way, which was a sensible thing to do.
Yeah, it was a good idea.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, they could be, and thankfully none of them were. And then the rest of the group climb through the window and like come in to assist her essentially. And Professor Crump and Torva decide to investigate the mushrooms more closely and even collect some. Now, Professor Crump got like quite a high roll and was able to like discern that some of these mushrooms are in fact edible. So he was like, okay, we'll harvest a couple. And Torva does an investigate on the mushrooms and notices something quite odd, that as Professor Crump is harvesting and cutting some mushrooms away, she can see some stalks of previously harvested mushrooms here and there, and so instantly they are suspicious, and someone has been here before us, and someone is cultivating these.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, because of course I wanted them to like find out what this epic was, but I also wanted them to have their own sort of combat thing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, here's a question, and this might be, like, asking slightly too much of your already amazing, like, intra-party dynamics, but did either of the 2, like, full Bard characters, like, have this thing where they were, like, obviously we're the like, members of staff here, we're the responsible adults, so, like, it's kind of our responsibility to make sure that none of these other, like, multi-classed characters get killed or whatever.
Yeah. There were some actually quite good interactions between Professor Bart and Professor Crump, namely that Professor Crump, in a brilliant moment of wisdom, and I say that incredibly sarcastically, decided to calm down a situation with Ella by casting Friends on her, which was like not great. And then
I'm pretty sure that probably violates like educational board of ethics type stuff. Exactly.
And this is where I'm going with this, Alex, because then immediately Professor Bart just just straight out of nowhere. It was fantastic. Just went, like, we've had you in front of the disciplinary committee 3 times for this, you know. And it was so good.
Right, okay, so these are maybe, like, not the best responsible adults to have on hand then.
No. I feel like this is Professor Crump's redemption arc.
I mean, he's probably tenured.
It was so good. I love that moment. And a part of me really, really wanted a moment that when combat actually started, I sort of wish one of the students would have a second where they were just like, I'm only doing extra credit, I'm not cut out for this. But sadly I did not. They were all just like went straight into fighting. Anyway, so there's like, aside from the statue room, there's one other way out, which is like covered in lichen and moss and stuff like that. So it takes them a little bit of time to find the doorknob that's just overgrown, and they push themselves into this room, and they find a room which they immediately suspect is quite odd because it looks perfect. Like, it looks as though it's been preserved in time, almost. And they find evidence there of, there was like a table and a fireplace with like still embers in the fireplace, it was like dusted recently, and crumbs on the floor and whatnot. And what they basically figured that was like someone was perhaps like what's the word I'm looking for? Not living here, just like illegally living here, possibly.
Well, I guess illegally in that they'd be like trespassing on a protected site.
Yeah.
All right.
They were like they were quite weird about like the condition of the room, which like was the response that I really wanted from them, because they were just looking around as like, this doesn't seem to have the same state of decay as anywhere else in this place, and it looks like someone has actually been here recently, which was the whole point of that one. So then they find the stairs. And, well, rather, they find the room where the stairs are, and they don't decide to go up the stairs immediately, because they see that there are, like, 4 other doors, essentially. It's like a cross-section, where the stairs are in the middle of this cross-section, so, like, a cross-section corridors. And Ella decides that she wants to go straight across to open one of the doors of this cross-section. So she walks immediately past the stairs, opens the door, and finds a room just overgrown with brambles and like a caved inside of the wall where the brambles have grown through and whatnot. And it's just like, oh, okay, like there's nothing really of any substance here. But then is all of a sudden beset upon by children of the brambles, was the monsters that I lifted from the Tome of Beasts by Kerbal Press.
Okay.
And so they were attacked by like these horrible little creatures that look like animate brambles, and they had combat. And when that combat was over, they decided, like, let's not open any more doors on this floor, and let's just go upstairs. And I was like, brilliant, okay. And my biggest worry was that they would try and go just immediately to the top floor. I factored that in, and I was like, I hope they don't. But thankfully for me, they were deciding to go along the lines of like, no, we are an investigatory party. We're like, we're looking around, so we'll just go to.
We need a beginning, a middle, and an end. So
yeah,
we can't just skip straight to the end.
So we're gonna go to the 4th floor, and I was like, okay, great. And once again, there's like 4 doors for them to choose from on the staircase of the 4th floor, and they entered the best room that they could possibly have gone into, which was the meeting room itself.
Okay.
And I was so pleased by this. And so they go in, and they find just like the large round table, and they see this lectern there, and this book like clipped into the lectern, and it's had some like damage in the past, and they like brush away all the dust, and have a look at it. It's written in Orcish, and this is how they find out all the names of those in attendance. So, and the scribe specifically states that what exactly happens, that the room darkened, the tower tremored, as I said earlier, the bodyguards were killed outside the door, and that a strange voice had echoed through the chamber, telling them that they would not escape the citadel alive, and that like how pleased the voice was that all these leaders were gathered in one place that can be eliminated in one fell swoop, and that it was like they didn't actually find out what all that was about, but based on what the voice was talking about, they were clearly an extreme anarchist.
Okay, right. So this isn't just like some warmongering empire builder who's like, oh, I can just get rid of the heads of state of all of my enemies at once and take them over. This was like somebody opposed to the idea of heads of state to begin with.
Yes, that's exactly it. But they were reading over the scribe's final notes on the matter, and they saw that this is what I found quite cool and quite interesting. They asked me, are there any other people in attendance other than the specific 6 pashas, which I only made important to them as being distinct from the rest of the heads of state that have been there, because the scribe explicitly puts that these 6 were the ones that were capable fighters. And they were the ones that then took the lead in making sure that everyone would get out, and then the scribe would finish on the lecture that I hope we make it out of here alive.
Okay.
And, obviously couldn't unclip the book in time.
That's a dedicated scribe to, keep recording when everything's going to shit.
Yeah. And, I was like, yeah, there were other people in attendance. There was, Yandinus Radim's own older brother, Rukvar, who was there, and the leader of the Yuan-Ti people, Caliph Analest, and her bodyguard Domet, and
Yuan-Ti as in, the half-snake people?
Yeah, who are, written entirely differently in my world, because I guess it's the same reason as why you don't like Drow. I do not like these explicitly Far East inspired race of people who are all universally evil and expansionist.
Yeah, and don't even get to actually be a playable race, but are rather exclusively monsters. It's kind of gross.
Yeah, I didn't like it, and so I changed up how it was even supposed to go, essentially.
I'm doing some creative expansion into the Pajeo Forest territory in my world, and I might do something with Yuan-Ti.
Awesome.
I'm not sure yet. Alright, anyway, go on.
So, the scribe, basically, took down, obviously, the names before the meeting came into full effect of who else was there, which immediately caused the Bards to become very, very suspicious, because, they knew their Orcish history, of course, and they knew that, it was somewhat odd that, Rukvar was passed over to inherit the throne as the older brother, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And, they kept wondering, do you think this was, an internalized coup against his own brother, that when this all went wrong for him, he obviously, had outside help so that he didn't have to implicate himself as the villain here? And they were also what's our current stance on the Yuan-Ti people in this world, essentially? I was like, well, some of them have actually been integrated into the Perusian Empire, and there's still 3 Yuan-Ti kingdoms elsewhere and whatnot. And they're just do you think the Yuan-Ti might have something to? It was fantastic. They were just all discussing what if this was one of the guests, Yeah, what if one of the guests had decided to create this coup, essentially?
I mean, now I'm interested as well, because I have theories.
I'd love to hear your theories at the end of it.
Hmm.
So, in this particular meeting room, they see that there's one door which is broken open, just completely shattered, and there's like this dark red, muddy, old blood stain like on the floor that's lasted for 300 years, and just bone dust around that. And there's another door where they can see that these tendrils of sandstone have hardened across the frame of the door, preventing anyone from like getting in or out, essentially.
Okay.
And so obviously they decide to investigate where the open door is, and because to them it was like very, very obvious that they had also escaped through this, and they'd like probably smashed their way through. So they go in, they see the blood stain on the floor, and they find this scorched circle in the next room, and a door open opposite them into a room that they investigate a bit later. So their first call of action is to like figure out what happened here. And what I quite like is how wrong they were here, where they looked at the bloodstains on the floor, and they looked at the broken door and the scorched circle on the ground, and they said, okay, what we think happened is that the Pashas broke out of the meeting room, and that someone had been standing behind the door that they accidentally killed. They just completely crushed this person.
An interesting theory.
Yeah, and that a fight had broken out, and that the scorched circle was like perhaps the responsibility of someone who could essentially use magic.
Okay.
And what actually happened was, like, as I've already stipulated, the bodyguards had been killed outside the door, and when they broke through into this other room, they found the corpses of the bodyguards, and it was that like they had no interaction with what happened to them. And when they went into the room, the scorched circle was actually an attempt by this strange disembodied voice to abduct the Yandinist Radim. As like dark tendrils began to like seep up from the floorboards and abduct him, which then Pasha Chella, the Dragonborn, immediately like counterspelled. Like, just jumped in and was just like, nope, denied, and rolled incredibly high for that. And so, like, I was like, okay, you've averted the abduction of the Yandinist. And I was sort of hoping that he did get taken. I'm not gonna lie. And then moves on to the next room, which they find the door open to. And they find a room full of glass, like not broken glass, like the floor itself looks as though it was once melted glass that had now hardened. And they see in some places there are like peaks and valleys of it that look really, really sharp, and they see a tapestry had been ripped off the walls in the previous room and thrown onto the floor of this this glass that had like over time essentially like slightly burned the tapestries and like absorbed them to put across to another door on the other side, which was also open. So
right, so it was a kind of bridge.
Yeah, the previous
right. I have like can I make a guess as to what happened here then from your description, and we'll see like how close, not only how close the bards got, but what was the actual correct answer.
Okay then, sure.
So the glass is the end result of some chemical process involving extreme heat. Like whether that might be like lava or just like actual molten sand or other minerals or whatever. So it was probably magical, which means that the tapestry was basically an attempt to make a sort of like bridge. And I guess if a tapestry worked, then it probably wouldn't have been that deep. It was more just like the floor is like covered in molten glass type thing. And now when they found it, that's like cooled down and it's just like a glassy floor.
Yeah, you're spot on, and as were the bards as well. And well, the floor itself was made of sandstone, So it was, like, indeed extremely heated up to, like, reduce it to glass, essentially.
Oh, right. So it's not even like anything is actually on the floor. It's just the floor got really hot.
Yeah, the floor turned to actual glass, like the top layer of this sandstone. And they tried to, like, throw tapestries across, and I'm like, this is going to burn the tapestries, essentially, guys. And so what the Bard group actually picked on quite well was the fact that they asked me, did the lection stipulate what color the Dragonborn Pasha was? And I was like, silver. It was like, oh, okay. So they were immediately like, I think that having failed to get these tapestries, there's like a safe bridge across to the other room, the Pasha Chala might have used her ice breath to then freeze all this molten glass. And I'm like, that is... I like didn't tell them that was what happened, and I'm like, there's a possibility. But that did actually happen.
All right.
She cast... Well, she didn't use her breath, she used Ray of Frost, because they were just realising that the tapestries were an inefficient method of getting people across.
As they would be, like, that's kind of a stupid idea.
Yeah.
Which is why I was like, oh, surely this must be a magical thing, or the tapestries must be magical or something. It's just actually a dumb idea.
Yeah, it was just a dumb idea. I was like, yeah, that these are melting. This is not going to work out, and not everyone... It's not going to be the evacuation plan that you thought it was. And then Chala was just like, I'm going to cast Ray of Frost and cool this all down.
All right, cool.
So then they got into the... they decided to double back, which I thought was, like, quite surprising. So they didn't carry on into the next room at all. Like, they didn't find anything, like, particularly noteworthy into the next room. They doubled back, and they went up to the sealed door, the one that still had its sandstone tendrils, like, wrapped across the front of it, preventing anyone access, and decided to cast Shatter on it.
Okay.
Which was great. I think... Yeah, Professor Grump shattered the door. And they went in, and they found just all of these corpses, essentially, of that had almost been reduced to bone meal by this point. But you could still tell from, like, their armor was still in place and whatnot. And they looked around these corpses, and they realized that these must have been the entourages and the bodyguards of the Pashas who had been invited. And they decided to, like, what do you think happened to these people, essentially? And I remember when we went to the Dwarf Lord Mountains in your game, Alex, and we could tell based on the skeletal remains of the dwarves that they had died locked in combat with one another. And so in this case, it was just like, they died where they stood. Like, it's pretty obvious that none of them turned on one another or anything like that. And they just went amongst the dead and were just, like, doing investigation rolls on sigils that they were wearing on their armor and on their bodies and shields and stuff like that to see who they were affiliated with.
Oh man, actual archaeologist stuff.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, it was fantastic, and I was like...
Because I was initially, like, skeptical, because I was like, surely if you're going to be following the Pashas, you don't want to be, like, breaking open routes they didn't take. But that's, like, a really good idea, actually, to try and get, like, a better idea of what was going on.
I was like, that's fantastic. And they found that, like, it was like, are any of these the sigil of the Perusian Empire? And I'm like, you find something similar, because it wasn't the Perusian Empire back then, it was just the nation of Perugiat. So you find, like, and they're like, oh, okay, so we find what the sigil originally was about 300 years ago? And they were like, yeah, pretty much. Like, oh, that's awesome. And they just found, like, other sigils from, like, the Yuan-Ti people and, like, the high elves who were in attendance, essentially. And they decided that they would go into another door that had been closed, that was also in that room, and I was like, okay, I'll let them do this. So they open this door and they find a room full of void, just completely full of void. It was like grey void, and they started, like, throwing mushrooms into it to see where they went. And
have like a miscellaneous item on you that's generally like what to do.
yeah, just like trying to see if they could get anything to happen here. And I was like, you don't hear anything from, and it doesn't come back. And they continue this experimentation like in a few floors up, because the point of the void rooms, which there were a few of them, that they figured out later was that they would transport you to a different room in the Citadel on a different floor, essentially, as like additional fuckery.
What would have happened to the Bards had they gone into a void that would transport you to a room that no longer existed because, like, the bottom 3 floors were destroyed?
That would have been interesting, wouldn't it? I would have had to have rolled for that one. And they decided that was enough exploration on the 4th floor, and so they decided to send the staircase onto the 5th floor. And they went into a room that the Pashas had no interaction with, that they found was like full of all these crystals, like actual cave crystals, essentially, that they found quite weird. And they were attacked while there by this I say it was like a gelatinous ooze, but I didn't want it to be a gelatinous ooze. My deal was it was homebrewed. I wanted it to create crystals.
All right.
I wanted that to be its deal. And when I originally created that creature for the Pashas to have interacted with, I kind of wanted like either them or any of the NPCs to have gotten caught and as a result of that begin to crystallize, which would have been good, because I came up with like this whole list of means of how I would preserve evidence, essentially, for the next party. And one of them was one of them was crystallization. I thought like that would be a cool thing to do, like, or maybe if they dropped an item here and this ooze like thing like smeared itself over it in its many travels in this room, and it crystallized over time, essentially. And so they thought this, and they were having a look at the room, and they were like, we don't think anyone was here. So they went back to the staircase, and they tried the only other room that they could, where they found a pillar that had been knocked down, and a dark bloodstain on the floor. And I was like, make me an investigation check. I was like, okay. And I was like, you've noticed that this pillar has actually, like, was actually moved. Like, it doesn't make sense where it's now lying to suggest that you think it was, like, more towards the middle of where this bloodstain was. So that then they just immediately clicked on. It's like, someone was trapped under here, and they must have lifted the pillar to get them out. And then, like, that just caused another sort of, like, theories being bounced around of, like, was it one of the Pashas? Was it, like, maybe the Andinist himself got, like, trapped? And they were just taking notes about this. And then, all of us, this entire time, I'm rolling dice, because they keep going to and fro on the staircase, essentially, which have fallen into a considerable amount of disrepair. And I was like, you have to move half your movement speed up the staircases, otherwise it's a long way down. And all of a sudden, I think Ella was able to succeed her perception check. She could hear something going on the staircase above, like what sounded like an altercation. And so she decided to, Torva, I think, as the ranger, cast Pass Without a Trace on everyone. And Ella went up the staircase to find out what was going on, like, to see if they weren't alone, essentially. And I kind of, like, was inspired a little bit by Dark Souls for this one.
Yeah, there's a lot of, like, very Dark Souls-esque stuff that I'm seeing here. Like, particularly when you were talking about the crystallizing ooze.
Yeah.
I was thinking of, you know, in Dark Souls 1, where the basilisks can petrify you, and sometimes you'll see, like, the petrification statues from other people who've been, like, recently killed by that.
Yes. Yeah. That was actually...
okay, I get it.
That was actually one of the preservation methods that I had written down. Like, I have
being petrified.
Yeah. Like, possibly petrification and stuff like that. I had so much. I had fossilization and burning earth, where, like, you know when you touch something hot and the handprint still remains?
Yeah.
That sort of stuff. I wanted evidence like that to still exist, so that there would be enough conclusive evidence for them to find. But
you put a lot of thought into, like, how this might be figured out archaeologically without having to just feed everything to the players.
Yeah. I mean, I did my best with what I got. So,
Alright.
Anyway, Ella goes up the staircase and sees this spectral image of a tiefling woman running down the staircase and, like, straight through her as though she's not even there and disappearing at the bottom of the staircase. And then is really confused by this, and no less than 2 minutes later, she hears at the top of the staircase an argument begin, started off by a loud slap, essentially. And so Ella goes up the staircase and sees what this is all about, and sees a tiefling, a half-elf, and a high-elf having an altercation where the tiefling slaps the half-elf across the face. And they're all dressed in finery, so, like, these are obviously all the pashas, or 3 of the pashas, and the tiefling slaps the half-elf across the face and tells them that they are being, like, selfish and evil and cruel, and that there are other people to, like, be concerned about, so get their arse downstairs and save this poor dying man. And then the half-elf reacts by putting his hand on his sword and starts advancing on the tiefling, and she sprints down the staircase as fast as she can. And so, like, this memory essentially captured by...
Yay, memory ghosts.
Yeah, this moment in time just keeps replaying and replaying, and they're just trying to, like, interpret what happened here. It's like, obviously this has to do with, like, what happened with the pillar and whatnot. And then it went on into, like, them thinking, like, did the Pashas actually end up killing each other? Like, did this cause, like, a massive rift in them? Because, like, that presumably none of them really knew each other or had any alliances with each other, so of course they might have turned against one another.
I feel like historically that's the kind of thing that you'd know, at least if they managed to get out at the end. You'd know that, like, no, they didn't, because they all got home. So, this is intriguing.
Yeah.
Continue.
They were just, like, very just confused by this and, like, trying to, like, figure out what might have happened. And they decided from that moment on just to go upstairs onto the final floor. And the final floor, they find 4 rooms leading from the staircase on all 4 sides that they decide to investigate each of them. And in one room, they find nothing but void in it, which they interact with later on, which I'll talk to. In another room, they find that the ceiling has been broken through, like as though someone inside the room had, like, smashed their way through the ceiling, and with something obviously incredibly hot, because the way that the impact essentially looks with it blasted out has caused the sandstone to turn to glass in places. And even now there are, like, just scorch marks all across the ceiling, essentially, just weird scorch marks. And one of the other rooms, they find that the floor has just been churned up as though it's stone. It's normal stone, but it's been churned in a way that, like, it would, as though it was once like the sea at some point. And they find a rod stuck in the middle of it, which they check the floor to make sure it's not, like, quicksand, essentially. And it's solid. They go up to the rod, and they find it's an immovable rod, which had been, like, slammed into the floor, and has obviously just, like, been held there. And then in the final room, they find that the floor just does not exist. It is like just completely collapsed through, and it's a long way down, essentially. And they're looking around, trying to like figure out what's going on here. And do you wanna have a guess?
Oh, so to like the final what was actually going on?
Yeah, like
because I have a theory, a pet theory, which is probably wrong, but my theory is that the reason that the Yan Dynast's brother was passed over for the throne is because he was a radical anarchist, and like he planned this entire thing to like have some anarchist group that he presumably had connections with that his mother could see but his brother did not, to like just come in and murder all the Pashas whilst like somehow extricating him.
That's good. That's so good, because like that is actually what the Bard group went away thinking. Essentially, they were like actually determined to completely, like, I say, vilify the older brother, because they were like, we're pretty sure he's at fault here, and they were just trying to figure out, like, well, they obviously figured out how the Pashas got out of here, essentially. Like, they... Oh,
did they make it to the Griffins?
Yeah, like, Ella was pushed through the hole in the ceiling and then, like, walks up, like, climbs, across this rooftop that she needed to make quite a few dex checks, essentially, because, like, it's quite crumbly and, dangerous, and just finds, like, this griffin paddock full of, old feathers and straw that, like, lingered there, essentially, and
Right, but no griffin skeletons.
No griffins. And then, like, she found the last piece of the puzzle, which was, like, whilst at the highest peak of the citadel, looking down, she could see on one side, in the far distance, about 10 miles away, was the new village of Lyesmith, essentially. Then, on the other side, she saw this large sphere, massive sphere of black marble, essentially, that had been like that had fallen, crashed down onto the ground, with like suggestion that it just impacted, with a massive hole through the center of it, and that it over time had like trees and stuff growing over the top of it. So it was like it was still noticeable, but only from like the height that Ella was at. If you'd have been walking around there, you probably would have had no idea that you were like walking on this massive sphere, essentially, just because of how overgrown all the 300 years worth of wildlife had become on top of it.
Alright, cool.
And so they were just like, whatever that thing is, we think that it was like used as a means of preventing the Pashas from escaping, and they must have had like somehow like knocked it out of orbit, essentially. They must have somehow either escaped from it or just destroyed it, taken it out. And
which is great, because one of the Pashas used to bullseye Wombrats in his T-16 in Beggar's Canyon, right?
Yes, this is what happened. And we were running out of time at this point, so they were just taking all these notes down for me of like, okay, this is what we think happened, this was what was going on. And of course they stole the immovable rod from the floor, because like, what?
It's a fucking immovable rod, right?
Yeah. Yeah, of course they like spent time breaking that out of there. And then they decided to like, we should interact with that room of void on the top floor. So they I can't remember what they did. They tied either they tied a mushroom to the end of a stick and shoved the stick into the void room and pulled it back out, and we're just like, is the mushroom okay? I'm like, it looks fine to you. So then Professor Crump decided in his, as I said again, infinite wisdom, to stick his head into the void room.
Yeah.
Just his head. And then I say to him that, like, you see these, a room, which is, like, dingy and overgrown with, a bit waterlogged and overgrown with lichen. And you see two figures, trying to keep this spluttering campfire alight, who look up to you. and they look like satyrs, except instead of goat legs, they had legs of grasshoppers, and they look at you with beady black eyes and grin at you with sharp fanged teeth, and I go, well, what have we here, boys? A new plaything. And then that was like gonna be like the final fight, essentially. The final confrontation is like the book that I took the inspiration from called them the Salang.
Okay.
And they were supposed to fight these creatures, and they went into the void room after that, after these individuals were dealt with, and they found a notebook in the void room, and they look into the notebook, and they find that this is a scouting party who had been hiding here, part of a greater invasion force of the Salang, and they were basically checking out the area so that they can destroy the Peruvian Empire. And I was like, that was going to be that was going to be like what the Bards got to fight for themselves, what they got to discover for themselves to like make them their own heroes, aside from just documenting an epic.
Okay.
And hopefully they would like take that notebook back with them when they returned to the capital. And since they were going to be performing at Jandainus Gisu's party, this epic, it would be sensible if that notebook got into her hands, or the hands of those that could be prepared to muster a defense. And that was the scenario that I ran, and it was so much work.
Yeah, they tend to be like these like multi-part scenarios, but I definitely find that they're worth it. Man, the garden party was so much work. It was so difficult, but it was so good, and it does sound like this was great. You mentioned that my theory was very similar to the theory that the Bards got, but I suppose now is your chance to let us know after the fact. Like, were either of us correct?
Well, yeah, because Rockbar wasn't actually responsible for this at all.
Right. That's like you were implying that, like, because I think you would probably just have said that, yeah, you got it correct, and also the Bards got it correct if either of us were actually right.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, well, I don't know, like, was it just like enemies of the state kind of thing? Was it like it's not that deep, and you were just like letting it be very simple so that whatever theory came out from the Bards would be interesting?
Essentially, because like I didn't want to have too much of my my own lore in there.
Right, because that makes it slightly more difficult. You definitely this is the thing, right? That's why I think both of us went for Rotvar as the culprit, because he's an introduced element.
Yeah,
it's like he's in the setup for the actual like initial scenario, and indeed for the secondary one.
Yeah, and in the first scenario, like, the Pashas treated him with a great deal of suspicion as well, because, like, they'd heard about, like, him being passed over for the throne, obviously, and he was there, and he's acting as an advisor for his younger brother, essentially, and he's kind of keeping to himself the entire time, and they just, like, what is he doing here? Like, what's his deal? Like, there's no way he's okay with not inheriting the throne, essentially. And none of them trusted Rockvar at all.
And the way that you made it sound as well was that, like, their mother was this, like, very, like, great and wise ruler. So it totally makes sense that she would have seen some unsuitability in Rotvar that his brother would not have done.
That is actually true. There's, like, this whole greater reason behind, like, how the Peruvian Empire essentially governs, and how the next Jandainus is chosen. And Radim was the better of the two, essentially. He was the one who would have been what the people needed at the time, because Rockvar does eventually rule after Radim dies, like, many years in the future, but he only rules for 7 years.
Right. So it's like Rotvar was actually fine,
Yeah.
but Radim just like knew the business better. Right?
Yeah, essentially. Like, Radim.
So what you're saying is Rotvar is Shane McMahon.
Yeah. That is what I'm saying.
All right, so neither of us got it then, but that's cool. That is really interesting, and I it's great to hear that your groups like got into it so well. I love hearing stories like that. Definitely. Like I remember saying as well, like last year, the time where I like, even though I was not a volunteer, one of my close friends was, and I was like, I'll help like tidy up because obviously you need some help, and just going around and listening to other people who had done cool stuff.
Yeah.
Like how well it had gone off. Like I think I remember telling the story about the guy who did Call of Cthulhu, but it's Dad's Army.
Yeah.
And he had like aesthetic props and stuff, and I'm like, this is a really cool idea, and I'm so glad to hear your story that it went off really well.
There was like a Cthulhu game going on this time that I was so interested in playing, but I decided to do something new for myself, because I always make myself a promise that I would try a new system.
It's a good place to do that.
And so I went for Shadowrun this year.
Shadowrun's cool. I don't think I've ever actually played the tabletop version of Shadowrun.
It was alright. I was a rigger, so like I didn't really need to do a lot, and I could like not hold back the rest of the group essentially, but I had like enough role playability that I was still quite useful. But at the same time as the Shadowrun game was going on, they were doing a Call of Cthulhu Swallows and Amazons game that...
What, shit, so it's Call of Cthulhu, but all of the investigators are like adventurer kids.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
And I was like, I really wish I could have been in that game, because like they wanted to do a Swallows and Amazons Famous Five sort of vibe, and I was like,
oh yeah, that's so cool.
I'd love that.
Having like these like investigatory, like Famous Five is exactly the kind of thing I was thinking of, like having these mystery solving children uncovering like an eldritch horror or something, and having to deal with that. That's such a cool idea.
Yeah,
I love that. Did you like ask them afterwards how it went?
I didn't get a chance to, actually.
Oh, that's a pity. I probably like should try and find out who did it, because that sounds amazing.
I think Casper. No, Casper didn't do it. Because Casper was running the. I'll probably like send it to you after this is all done.
Right.
It was like a game that I was definitely really interested in.
Yeah, that's such a neat idea. I love this. I love that, like, QCon. I imagine this happens at other, like, conventions, at least at ones that arise from a similar context. But I love that people just come up with these, like, weird, quirky ideas where there's no reason why they shouldn't work, but maybe they work just for, like, 2 or 3 sessions at a convention rather than as, like, an extended campaign.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's so neat. All right, so since Beth's not here to ask this question, I should probably ask, what did you learn this QCon? Because I think it's kind of traditional for us to ask this question now.
Well, I feel like I learned that people will genuinely be more interested to like jump on the bandwagon of a weird idea. That like it was an idea that I didn't have a lot of, like, I was very confident with how I was going to pull it off, but I also was like incredibly worried about like it being received well.
I can see that, yeah. I think, I don't want to say that's a QCon exclusive thing, but I think like definitely that sort of environment where there's this sort of social context about how, like, where everybody is coming from helps, especially for like new players. Because then you can be like, oh, well, we're doing a weird thing that these people won't really have done before anyway, so you're not going to be, like, super behind. Whereas I think for more entrenched stuff, like the 24s or a normal Tuesday night at Dragon Slayers or whatever your gaming club is, that can be a little harder to believe. Because even then, it's like, these people presumably know each other, so they might have like a standard for how weird stuff is done, and I don't really know about that sort of thing. Whereas at a convention, like, you don't think about that stuff, especially because of the way that game sign-ups are done. Because it's like, you have no reason to believe that these people know each other well and have played with each other for like years.
Yeah.
Because it's first come, first served sign-ups for games. So it's entirely possible that somebody who's like really into a particular DM would have signed up for their game, but it doesn't mean anything. So you can come in and be like, oh, even if I don't know, I'm gonna have fun and I'm gonna try this thing out and see if I like it. And it's cool if you don't. Like, genuinely, I would say if there is like and I would say, like, I wouldn't just say this for QCon, because obviously that means that this is only like a Northern Irish, maybe Irish thing to say. I would say any kind of convention that is set up that way, as like a gaming convention set up by like a group, like a gaming group, like Dragons, like a society or a club or something. Just if there's a game that you've really wanted to get into, but you're not, you have some trepidation about it, particularly if it's a tabletop role-playing game, go and see if anybody is doing it. Like, tabletop role-playing, wargaming, Magic the Gathering as well, you will probably, at these kinds of conventions, find somebody willing to teach you and who will have either a second deck or is willing to do the thing where they split their constructed deck in two to, like, just teach you the ropes, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's fine. It's good. I love that QCon can continue doing this year after year, is just, like, show people not only, hey, this is how you play Dungeons and Dragons or Call of Cthulhu or Traveller or Pathfinder or goodness knows what, but you can also have fun with this idea.
Yeah, and I was like just really happy that everything went off great. Essentially, I was like, the group complimented me afterwards and said that they'd had a bad time the day before with RPGs, and that like mine had more than made up for their entire weekend at QCon, which I thought was like, that's really nice. And I'm glad that it was really obvious that you put so much hard work into this, and we just appreciate it. And even the previous two people of the previous group came up to me afterwards to ask me how it went, because they were really, really excited to know if this new group had figured anything out that they had done.
I think I remember that, like, when I did the garden party, there were a couple of people from the first or second group who came up to ask, like, how the timeline had changed based on the actions of the third group, because they were interested in seeing, like, what did we do that, like, stayed in, and what did we do that got, like, prevented.
A part of me always worried that, like, if Cora the Bard had shown up to you and you had to, like, then tell her, sorry, my friend Maxi just completely removed your character from play.
I feel like had I described the way you'd done it, she would have found it really funny. But no, it's good. And that thing where you said that the second group had a bad experience before, I would say also, like, if you end up going to a convention like this and you have, like, if there's multiple days, or like you have a thing in the morning and a thing in the afternoon or whatever, like, go and do as much stuff as you can, because sometimes it doesn't quite go off the way you or the GM wants, and that doesn't mean that that's the way it's always going to be. Like, try more than one thing, definitely. Like, maybe you had one bad experience and you're like, I don't really want to, like, go through and do that again. Do something in a different system and with a different GM than the thing that you did before, assuming that your convention does different systems and has more than one GM soliciting players. And sometimes just sign up for the wacky idea. Then, if you did a standard thing, sign up for the wacky idea. If you did a wacky idea and it didn't really work out, maybe sign up for, like, a more traditional type of game. Like, try and get, like, a broad scattered kind of landscape of what people can play.
Yeah. I'd say one thing I definitely learned is that just always, I think this is just, like, for everyone, but always be prepared when, like, things don't go the way that you think they would have gone. Mostly just because when I finished the first game and I was like, okay, I've now mapped out the path that they've taken, I've written down what they've done, and then I started thinking about, like, preparing for the second game, and I was like, there are a bunch of rooms which these people had no interactions with, and presumably still have evidence of something weird happening there that the second group are going to interact with. And I was like, I really should have thought about that, and completely didn't. So I was just like, okay, so, like, they're probably going to, like, interact with these other rooms and, like, might even think that something happened there, and I'll have to, like, prepare for that.
Well, I mean, like, the cool thing that you set up is because you were leading them on with these archaeological clues, you knew already that there wouldn't well, there would be some, but there wouldn't be like any left by the Pasha players in those rooms. So you already had this kind of like vague guide towards like where they needed to go.
Yeah.
Which is cool, I think.
Yeah, I think it was just like nightmare visions of the idea of them finding a room in which was fossilized, and they were just like, what happened here? And I'm just sitting there going like, trying to hold in, literally nothing happened there, please move on.
It is a problem. Sometimes it can be like honestly just as interesting, but I think definitely always be prepared for your players to go off script is a decent piece of advice for any GM in basically any game. In fact, I think it was like such an important piece of advice that we even did an entire episode of the podcast about it. We did, episode 18, DM Improv.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, because that is the likelihood. You're just going to have to deal with that. And sometimes, I think we said on that episode, like sometimes as a player, you're going to clock that your DM is improvising. Don't feel bad about that, because you're gonna get into like a cycle of the players either going further off track to screw with the DM, or realizing that they've gone off track and are inconveniencing the DM and trying to get back on. And like either way, if you try and change your behavior as a player to like fit, then it's gonna do something weird. Just try and roleplay accurately and go with what your GM's trying to do.
Absolutely. I mean, we threw you off track on Monday.
Oh, yeah, you did. I guess I can talk about that briefly. So, in my Monday campaign, we have just finished a really amusing arc where, in order to obtain the magical MacGuffin that is required to get back on track with your, like, overarching story, you all had to compete in a professional wrestling tournament.
Yeah. I love...
And this must have been excruciating for you, because for those of you who don't know, Maxi, much like me, is a big fan of professional wrestling. WWE specifically, I've watched like a couple of indie shows which didn't really do it for me. They were fine. They were all right. But Zaloshka, Tolk Zaloshka, the character that Maxi played, has, as far as I can tell, not had a positive emotion in the last 3 years, and is not down with wrestling and thinks it's stupid and performative and you know it's fake, right?
It was absolutely killing me.
So yeah, you got to be this like super like almost Mark-like player playing this like completely sandbagging, not into it at all character.
Oh, even as you say it, it's killing me.
But there was this thing where Tolxoloshka is a displaced tiefling, like she is a tiefling who was born to tiefling parents in the city that they were in. But because her parents were both at the time royal guards of the God King, and the God King was like, please don't fraternize with each other because we're at war and I don't want you to like do that and have babies. So they were punished for it and they couldn't keep the child. The child was sent on this pilgrimage where she like eventually got adopted by dwarvish parents in Meslin. So she's grown up like as a dwarf with dwarvish culture. She has a dwarvish name, which is why like her surname goes first with a hyphen after it. That's why she's called like Tolk Zaloshka. Like Zel is her actual name. So there was this thing where it's like, oh, and also you might meet your biological parents here. And she did. You might have one more opportunity to interact with your bio mum, who is like a palace guard now, so not like a royal guard. She got demoted. She's just like outside the lift now, but she's still got a job. Whereas her bio dad, Perseverance, got fired entirely and then turned into like one of the legends of this pro wrestling league and is an XP for the Undertaker. And so he turned up because the final tournament that they did was the Royal Rumble.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was like, yeah, I'm basically going to do like a wrestling nerd thing and have like these 5 players fight XPs of all of my faves. And like I like set out like what all of the numbers were going to be, and I had like number 28 is Zell and number 29 is Balbugash, who is supposed to be an XP of Roman Reigns, because that like gave me the opportunity to have the crowd just start yelling bullshit. And then number 30 is the Revenant, who is Zell's biodad, who hates that she exists and like legitimately tries to kill her in the ring. And so like later we had it that he is going to continue trying to kill her because he's like got it into his head that he can restore his honor and restore himself to his former esteemed position if he erases the evidence of his mistake by killing Zaloshka, which is not how it works. And like Lut, the God King, in person told Zaloshka that that is not how it works, but he would not listen, and he attempted to attack Zell and Jay outside the lift. And because we were waiting for Kia, who was the Dragonborn Rev's player, Kia to actually come online so that we could do like the side plot with Rev, I was like, oh, this will take up some time for a bit. And Jay was just like, nope, and just like dimension doored out there with Zell. And I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, Percy just tried to like murder guests of the God King in front of palace guards. So I guess he's dead now?
Yeah.
Because it's like, that's treason? You can't just do that? So I was just like, off screen, he got murdered by a group of palace guards who included his like ex-lover.
Yeah.
I kind of hope that you do like meet and talk to Chastity at some point before you leave, but I don't know whether that's something that Zell will be compelled to do.
I'm planning on it because like Zell feels kind of weird about like the way that went down. And feels as though like maybe she should at least say something to her biological mother.
Right.
Like a part of me like is just super paranoid that like I don't know if him being the Revenant was a stage name and or the actual story arc that he had as a wrestler in that he died 2 years ago has actually made him a Revenant and he is going to show up.
This is the problem that I had with because it's like when you have actual wrestling, you have wrestlers like The Undertaker and Bray Wyatt and whatever who like have these magical special effect powers that they can do in the ring, and like Kane, I guess. But when you transpose that into Dungeons and Dragons, you have to deal with the fact that people, as a matter of course, may or may not have magical powers. And in fact, there was a point during the Rumble where Revaclass actually got disqualified for assuming a water elemental form.
Yes.
Because you can't grapple a water elemental to throw it over the top rope, and the ref just comes in and goes like, no, you can't just make yourself unthrow over the ropeable. That's... Like, we let a lot of stuff slide for the purposes of sports entertainment, but you can't do that. That is not fair. And so I think, like, Rev tried to make a charisma save to be like, if I turn back into a Dragonborn, can I stay in? And the ref was just like, no, you can't. You blur. Get out. Because I was wanting to make it so that, like, Zell and the Revenant had this one-on-one thing, and I could not get Silas out of the ring.
I know.
Like, every bloody time I brought in a wrestler who was gonna try and, like, get rid of him, it did not work.
And, like, it like, almost killed Zell to, like, get Silas out of the ring afterwards when she ultimately turned on him. And we were just, like, I imagine them just rolling on the ropes together, like, trying to, like, forcibly push one another off the...
Oh, yeah, that's right, because, like, I mean, effectively, Silas jobbed to Zell, right? Because it was always, even though you were like, let's not do this, like, obviously, Silas, like, giving it up, it's like, it's gonna be Zell.
Yeah.
Zell is gonna win.
I mean, Zell was just, like, of the mind that she'd seen the confetti barrels, and she doesn't know that Silas had one full of fireworks.
Is that Zell is currently under an oath to Silas's horrifying Dark Souls boss-esque Fae patron.
Yeah.
To like not let harm come to him, and she knew that he'd set up this like weird shit for when people get thrown out of the ring involving fireworks, and she's like, oh no, I can't eliminate him because he's gonna kill himself. As it happened, Silas ended up getting a concussion because he's an idiot.
Yeah, and then, like, we left him alone to experiment on fireworks because we decided not to bring him for an audience with the God King in case he decided to create anarchy and chaos in the middle of the throne room. So, we couldn't win, basically.
No, Silas is a character. I definitely should have Matt on one of these while I'm, like, trying to podcast without Beth so that we could talk about, like, all three of his characters, actually. Like, Matt is very good at creating colourful characters. I want to talk about Silas and Harrow and Leatherhead.
Maybe while, like, Beth is essentially out of commission for the podcast, you could just send her a message to, like, say, like, what questions would you like to ask Matt about Harrow if you just get Harrow on? I mean, just get Matt on.
That's a good idea, actually. And I suppose as well, like, this is kind of weird because obviously when and if we actually get Matt on, we'll probably be the first that a lot of people are hearing about these characters. But if there's, like, any questions that people in the audience want to ask Matt, I could probably, like, try and get that in. Also, if you have any questions for Maxi, I mean, it's probably not going to be the last time we have her on the show. And also, your YouTube name is Maxi Fails Dex Checks in real life or something like that, right?
Yeah, but like you can find me on Twitter as Marcus Monk.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. Yes, that's a thing that we do on the podcast when we're finishing up.
Yeah.
So I've been Alex, and this has been Maxi. You can find me on Twitter, Tumblr, and Twitch as Cleaver Crummish, which I will spell in the description with links, I guess. No, I'm not going to do links. Screw you. Go and find me on the services. You can put in a bit of work. And you are Marques Monk on Twitter, which is probably the best place to contact you.
Yep.
Right. Cool. So yeah, that has been great. I've no idea what I'm going to use for like a cold open and a stinger because we've stayed like largely on topic. Now.
Yeah, we have.
Anyway, so yeah, that was great. Thank you for coming on the show, Maxi.
Thank you for having me.
So yeah, I don't know when the next episode's going to be. Oh God, 30 episodes, and we've been doing the show for over 2 years. Man, I wish we could be more regular, guys. It's not going to happen. Like I've decided, like at this point, we really just stop making excuses for it because it's not that we slip up. It's that it is literally untenable for us to do a weekly or bi-weekly podcast at this point. Like where my life is, and particularly where Beth's life is at the moment. It just is not going to happen. So you get new episodes when you get new episodes, and I'm not worrying too much if they go on long. I think I'm just going to like upload this one as is because the QCon episodes have like a reputation, I guess. Like there's a precedent for them just being like longer than an hour.
Yeah.
But if I like get to do an episode with Beth and it ends up becoming a 2-parter because it was so long, it's like I'm not going to turn down more content. That's not going to happen. That we can actually just get something out for you to listen to. Because those have not been received badly, like the previous 2 that we did. So you'll get some podcast when you get it, and I hope that you find it enjoyable. In the meantime, please do continue sending us topics and I guess stories, like D&D stories. Like if I got enough of those like solicited from other people, I could theoretically just do an episode by myself where I talked about like actual D&D stories from other people. I could do my reading voice. Come and watch my stream, by the way, if you like hearing me do silly voices, because currently I am playing Baldur's Gate on Sundays, where a lot of characters I end up doing silly voices for, just because it makes the reading less monotonous that you have to do to understand that game. It's good. I've got further, I think, than I've ever got before. We just, at time of recording, I've just stepped into the actual city of Baldur's Gate for the first time.
How many questions are you doing for like the Q&A episode? Because I know I might send you a bulk ton.
You could send us some. Like, I think we don't yet have enough to do an actual episode, so like definitely more would help.
Okay.
Oh yeah, Thursdays on the stream is probably going to be Clive Barker's Undying going forward, which I'm not going to do silly voices for because I'm pretty sure it's all voice acted, but it's cool. It's a horror game. It's from that Quake era where everybody looks like they're made of construction paper, which I'm super into as an aesthetic. So it's cool. It's going to be great. So that is twitch.tv/Cleaver Crummish on Thursdays and Sundays. So yes, thank you for joining us all on House of Bards. And so from me and from Maxi, goodbye.
Bye. Oh, and if I get any questions about, like, what was the dark sphere thing in the air, and, like, how did the Pashas deal with that, I'll just answer it right now. They had a wand of wonder, and they rolled tractor beam for it, and they shot down the just this massive orb in the air that was gathering power to basically do a Death Star on the Citadel. So like they just like, we got a wonder, we might as well use it. And there was absolutely no way, I feel, that the Bards could have found out that they had like this wand of wonder, and that's how they like figured it out. Though if anyone wants to like offer suggestions of how I could have made it so that the Bards could have figured that out, like, I'd love to hear it.